Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to learn how to work with the cache in Laravel. Let's jump into the action and let me explain. So if you log out so that you can view the guest homepage, we have this bit of text here on the left hand side that reads, are you sick of short tweets? So on and so forth. And then maybe at the end of this paragraph of text, imagine if we wanted to say, our users have authored blank number of posts. Now, yes, that's a fairly quick SQL query to find out the real dynamic number of how many blog posts there are. But use your imagination. What if that was a complex or expensive or slow query to run? The idea is that every single time someone refreshes the homepage, we would not want to have to run that query again and again and again. Imagine if it was a slow, expensive query, it would make more sense to just get that value once and then maybe remember that value for the next hour or even just the next 5 minutes. So to get started, let's just open up the correct Blade template file in question. So for example, if you go into your resources folder and then the views folder, we would want to open up homepage.blade.php. as opposed to homepage feed.blade. So just homepage blade. For me, it's around line 6, but that's where we see that paragraph of text, right? So at the very end of that paragraph, I would just add on and say, our users have authored, double curly brackets, some sort of dynamic number, like whether that's 100 or whatever, but blank posts. Cool. Now, in these brackets, let's add a variable, and we'll just name it like post count like this. So now we know that we need to go into the controller that's rendering this Blade template and be sure to pass it in a variable with this matching name of post count. So for example, if we saved this and then opened up our user controller, so in app and then HTTP controllers, if we jump into usercontroller.php, I believe we have a function with the name of homepage or show correct homepage. Yes, so for me it's around line 87, we have a function named show correct homepage. So if you're not logged in, then we're just returning this instead of homepage feed, just homepage. So when we're calling that, let's just give it a second argument, give it an array, and then we would have a property named post count, just like this. And temporarily, let's just set it to the number 100. But if we save that and refresh our homepage, perfect. Now, if we were not going to cache this value, here's what we could do. We could literally just say, instead of 100, just use our post model, : and call the count method. So we could save that, and that's going to get us, whoops, it looks like I forgot to import the post model class at the top of this file. So, you can just right click on post, click import class, give that a save, refresh. Cool. So that gets you your actual real true dynamic number, right? So our users have authored 24 posts. But the idea is that imagine if that was a slow query. What if this was some sort of complex, expensive query? There's no sense rerunning that query every single time someone visits the homepage. Luckily for us, Laravel makes working with cached data really easy. So check this out. Here's what I would do. Right above that return, but in the else block, I would just say create a variable named post count. So $post count equals. And now there's a bunch of different ways that you could set this up. But what I want to show you is that there is a facade or a reusable class in Laravel just called uppercase cache like this. And it has all sorts of useful methods like put if you wanted to store something in the cache, or get if you wanted to retrieve something from the cache. Or it has one called has if you wanted to check to see if something existed in cache or not at the moment. Let me actually delete this line entirely. So for example, let me show you what you might intuitively do, and then I want to show you how Laravel makes it even easier because Laravel's already thought of it. But for example, you might want to say if, parentheses, curly brackets, and then have an else. And for your condition, you might want to see okay, well, does post count already exist in cache? Because the idea is that you can set something to expire. Maybe you say, we want this to exist in cache for the next 5 seconds or the next 5 minutes, so on and so forth. So you could say if cache : has, if we gave it the key, a label or name of post count. So then only if that currently exists in cache, then we could retrieve it. We could create a variable and set that to equal, and then use the cache : get, And, the key or label would be post count, just like this. Else, if it does not exist in cache, we would want to put it or set it into cache. So let's just create a matching variable, $ post count, and set it to equal. And then we would just, use our post model, : count, semicolon. And then below that, we would actually put it or store it into cache. So cache, : put. And then the label or key of the, the data we're trying to create in cache would be post count, comma, the actual value, like, instead of the number 100, we just created a variable named $ post count where we actually retrieved it ourselves, comma, and then you say how many seconds you want to keep this in cache. Now there's no right answer here, but like if you wanted a minute, you'd say 60 seconds, or, if you only want to store it for 20 seconds, so on and so forth. Okay, now before we forget, let's update this line so that we're not actually dynamically performing the count right here. Let's set this instead to, we named it $ post count. And that's either going to be coming from our if block or our else block. Now to make it painfully obvious whether we're actually retrieving it from cache or putting it into cache, let's do this. Right about here, let's call sleep and just for 5 seconds. Now you would never actually purposefully make your website slow down and do nothing for 5 seconds. We're just doing this so it's painfully obvious how this cache system is working. So I'll explain it once we actually refresh the web browser, but before we save this, let's be sure to right click on cache and choose import class. Cool. Let's save this, and now the very first time that we refresh, we're going to get a 5-second timeout from the sleep. So in other words, you can see it's loading, it finally finishes, but now if we refresh anytime after that, for the next 20 seconds that lives in cache, you can see every single refresh is lightning fast because it's coming from the cache. However, if we wait 20 seconds, then this would need to run again. So essentially, if it's in the cache, we just retrieve it from the cache. If this evaluates to false, if our cache does not have a label or a key of post count, the else is going to run. That's where we're putting the sleep just so that it's obvious what's happening. But then that's where we're storing or putting something into the cache, and we're saying this should only live there for the next 20 seconds, right? But then as soon as those 20 seconds expire, then it's not going to exist in the cache, so then this would evaluate to false once again. So in other words, if we refresh, we're going to get that 5-second timeout, 3, 4, 5. However, now I can refresh, and it's lightning fast. So that's an example of manually working with the cache, right? Where you're checking does something exist? If it does, retrieve it. If not, set it. And that's great. That works, but Laravel can make our lives a lot easier. Laravel has a function on the cache facade named remember that is for this exact purpose. So check this out. I'm actually going to delete this entire if-else block for the cache, and instead we can literally just say $ post count equals cache : remember, semicolon. Now in remember, we give it 3 things. So like A, B, C. The first thing we give it is the key or the label in the cache that we're looking for, right? So, post count. The second thing you give it is how many seconds you want to remember that in cache. So let's remember it for 20 seconds. And then the third thing you give it is a function. Now, this function will only run if the data does not exist in cache. If the data does exist in cache, well, then that's what the function is going to return. So in other words, instead of C, we would just say like function, parentheses, curly brackets. In the body of the function, we could just call sleep for 5 seconds just so it's obvious. And then what you want to do in the function is just return your actual dynamic value that you would want to store in the cache. So we would just return, our post model and call count. So this syntax though is so much cleaner than that if else, where we were manually checking has, get, put. So we can just go ahead and save this. And again, the first refresh is going to get that 5-second timeout. You would never do that in real life. It's just to prove a point. But now we can refresh for the next 20 seconds. We are remembering that value in cache, and we are good to go. The idea is that anytime in your application, if you're performing an expensive or slow query, or better yet, if you're retrieving data from some sort of third-party API where it's going to require a network request on your end, right? That's going to be very slow compared to if you could just store it in cache for the next 5 minutes or the next half hour, so on and so forth. So there's no right or wrong way of like how long should you cache something or what exactly should or shouldn't you cache. That's more of an art than a science, and you could make an entire course just on caching best practices. But the idea is with just what we've learned in this lesson, you can dramatically speed up the performance of your website. That is going to bring this lesson to a close. In our next lesson, we're going to learn how to set up API endpoints or API URLs. In other words, imagine if you were building like an iOS application or an Android application or some sort of application that wasn't directly in a web browser with the concept of cookies, right? You should be able to programmatically log in to Our App account. And then you should get some sort of token that, in response, that if you give the correct username and password, you get a token, and then you can send that token with further requests to do things like create a blog post or delete a blog post of your own, right? And you should be able to do that programmatically, whether that's from an iOS app, an Android app, or an application like Postman or Insomnia REST, right? But just through REST URLs or REST endpoints. That's exactly what we're going to learn how to set up in our next lesson using something called Laravel Sanctum. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you then.